The first snowstorm of that winter rolled across Iceland like a white beast, swallowing the horizon in silence. But the settlement at Hafnsdalur barely flinched. The turf houses, low, dark, seemingly modest, waited with the confidence of creatures born from the earth itself. They'd survived worse, much worse. Eric Hafrenson stood outside the longhouse, his boots sinking into frozen moss, watching the storm push across the valley. Every gust rattled the European-style timber hut the settlers had tried building when they first arrived years ago. That thing was already half dead. The turf houses, though, they were alive, warm, steady, breathing with the land. Back when Eric's father came from Norway, he dreamed of wooden halls like the ones of the fjord kings. He soon learned Iceland wasn't playing by the same rules. Forests were thin, winds were vicious, winter lasted longer than sanity. Wood rotted, roof beams warped, but land didn't flinch. So the Norse did what they always did when the world challenged them. They adapted. They built down, not up. Thick walls layered with turf, stone foundations that locked in warmth, living roofs that grew thicker with every season. Homes designed not for the climate they came from, but for a climate far colder than anything they had ever known. Tonight, as the storm swallowed the valley, Eric felt the ground rumble. The house responded, the turf roof stiffening under wind pressure, the interior temperature holding steady, the structure shifting ever so slightly with the earth. It wasn't a house. It was a shelter grown like a plant, engineered by instinct and necessity. The elders used to joke, wood fights the weather. Turf ignores it. And ignoring this storm was exactly what it was doing. Eric pulled his cloak tight and stepped inside. His breath disappeared instantly. The warmth hit him like a wave. A family of 6 sat around the central hearth, the smoke drifting upward into a vent so cleverly angled the wind outside couldn't force it back in. "The storm's here early this year," Eric muttered. His mother smirked. "Good. The house likes a challenge." Everyone in Hafnsdalur knew that turf houses weren't just built, they were layered like myths. First came the stone foundation, heavy volcanic blocks set deep enough to resist seasonal heave. Then came the driftwood beams scavenged from the coast, the only reliable timber Iceland truly offered. Over that came the bones of the house, thick bricks of cut turf stacked in a crisscross pattern, each piece holding moisture, insulation, and weight without collapsing. Every layer mattered. Every mistake meant death. Eric remembered helping his father rebuild a wall when he was 12. The wind had ripped away the outer turf layer, and for a brief moment the cold seized the house. Only a moment, but it was enough to remind everyone how fragile life really was. "Stone first, turf last," his father said, handing him a block cut from mossy ground. "A man who forgets the order builds himself a grave." The thickness alone amazed visitors. Nearly a meter of turf stood between a family and the ice outside. But what truly impressed travelers from Europe was the silence. Turf swallowed sound like a cave. A baby could scream inside, and outside all you'd hear was wind. Tonight, with the storm raging, Eric walked through the main hall listening to the house breathe. Yes, breathe. Air moved through channels under the floor, warmed by earth heat. Smoke drifted up through a vent shaped like an inverted funnel. Condensation collected on walls, but never truly soaked through. A balance of moisture and dryness achieved by people who worked with nature, not against it. Across the room, his younger sister hunched over a carved wooden box, sorting herbs. "She says we'll need these," she said without looking up, "if the storm lasts longer than expected." "How long does she expect?" Eric asked. His sister shrugged. Longer than last year. That wasn't a good sign. The climate had been changing. Winters longer, summers shorter, storms unpredictable. The elders whispered that Iceland was growing colder, not gradually, but in sharp, brutal jumps. And somehow these houses, these humble turf shelters, were prepared for a cold even the Vikings hadn't anticipated. It almost felt as if the houses were built for a future no one had yet met. When night fell, the storm grew violent enough to shake the outer stone layers. Eric sat near the hearth as the oldest man in the settlement, Thorvald the archivist, traced patterns across a worn sheepskin map. His eyes reflected the fire, ancient and sharp. These houses, Thorvald began, tapping his finger on a drawn structure, aren't Norse, not entirely. Eric blinked. They're ours. They're adaptations, Thorvald corrected. Blended knowledge. Irish monks used turf in Ireland long before our people crossed the sea. Some Sami techniques made it into the Norwegian north. And Iceland itself taught us the rest. He leaned closer. Look at the angle of our roofs. Too steep for rain, too shallow for snow. Built to shed wind above all. That design didn't come from Norway. It came from Iceland beating our ancestors senseless until they listened. The room chuckled softly. Thorvald continued. Every generation adds something. A thicker wall, a deeper foundation, better vents, tighter insulation. We've been building for a world colder than ours for far longer than we've admitted. Eric frowned. But why think the world will get colder? Thorvald didn't hesitate, because it already is. He pointed toward the roaring wind outside. Winters grow harsher, ice forms earlier, storms are angrier. I've seen 40 winters. This one feels like it wants to erase us. Silence settled over the room. But, he added, tapping the map again, our houses are ready. They've always been ready. Everyone looked toward the turf walls, thick, warm, silent. The Vikings had built for survival, but survival might not be enough for what was coming. The storm lasted 3 days. By morning the 4th, the wind died so suddenly it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Eric stepped outside into a valley muted by snow. The light bounced off endless white, almost blinding. Half the wooden hut near the river had collapsed. No surprise. The turf houses, though, every single one stood intact, their roofs buried under snow, but unfazed. He walked past them, brushing snow from the thick outer walls. Beneath his gloves, the turf felt firm, warm even, as if the earth below was feeding the house from within. That's when he noticed something odd. A pattern. The snow melted slightly faster above some turf houses than others. Not from sun, the sky was still dull and gray, but from heat escaping in a perfectly controlled gradient. Almost intentional. He crouched down, touching the roof. The turf was breathing again. These houses didn't just withstand cold, they adapted to it in real time. He stood slowly, a strange mix of awe and unease running through him. The Vikings didn't understand modern thermodynamics, but they created a proto-earthship, a passive heating, self-insulating, climate-adaptive design that modern builders still struggle to replicate. Maybe Thorvald was right. Maybe these houses weren't built for the world the Vikings had inherited, but for the world they feared was coming. And maybe that world was already here. The blizzard didn't let up. By dawn, the settlement looked like it had been carved out of a glacier. Snow had piled up so high that some of the older timber sheds collapsed under the weight, their wooden beams snapping like brittle bones. Eric stood over the ruins of what used to be the goat barn, the broken planks jutting out from the snow like ribs. Behind him, the turf houses sat half-buried but unfazed, their curved, grass-covered roofs shedding weight evenly, their thick walls pushing against the pressure as if they'd done this 1,000 times, because they had. "These wooden huts are useless," Eric muttered. "Only to fools who try to build Norway and Iceland," old Joran replied, her voice as dry as driftwood. She leaned on her walking stick, peering at the ruins. "They brought their old ways here," she said. "Didn't listen to the land. Iceland doesn't care what worked in the past." That line hit him hard, because deep down he knew the truth. The Vikings didn't build turf houses because they wanted to. They built them because they had no choice. It was innovation under pressure, survival engineering born from stubbornness and desperation. The